So as promised, Week 14 of the 2015 NFL season is officially in the books, and we're focusing on the stretch run of the regular season, getting ready for the playoffs. Oh boy. But for a lot of fans of teams like mine, the Bears, we're already looking ahead to the offseason, when we're already looking ahead in particular to the 2016 NFL Draft, because that's all that really matters at this point in time. The season is done, it's cooked, no reason to even be bothered with it, frankly. And frankly, this hasn't exactly been the best season of NFL football. Does anybody else notice the product and the quality of the product is not that good this year? I mean, you have a few pretty good teams, but man, a lot of bad teams. A lot of mediocre football being played. But anyways, I digress. So it's time for me to give you an updated 2016 NFL mock draft. It's that time of week, and as promised, today's version is going to be a 3-round mock, and hopefully all 3 rounds worth of picks will fit down below in the description box. And as always, as you look at the picks, look at your team, look at where I have certain players go, hearing my thoughts, you are always welcome to chime in with your thoughts, comments, questions in the comments section down below as well. So let's talk a little bit about this mock draft. With the Cleveland Browns winning this past Sunday against the San Francisco 49ers, they have dropped out of the number 1 overall spot, which puts the Tennessee Titans in a position that's not all that good. Without a clear-cut quarterback for sure that's absolutely 100% worthy of the number 1 overall pick, the Titans picking number 1, they're in a position where maybe their biggest needs potentially aren't right to be addressed with that number 1 overall pick. Now, granted, I'm not in a position where I'm doing any trade downs and any mock drafts. That won't come until after the Super Bowl when I start talking and thinking about that. But in this case, for the Tennessee Titans, I've been on them for a little while about taking Laremy, Tunsil, the offensive tackle from Ole Miss. It would allow him to either play him at right tackle and have Laquon and Tunsil as bookend tackles protecting Mariota's sides for the next decade, or maybe you could play Tunsil at left tackle and you move Laquon over to right tackle and you really beef up your offensive line, and again, you're protecting Mariota, your franchise guy for the next decade, and that has to be a big priority here. You're going to ultimately go as the Tennessee Titans the way Marcus Mariota goes, so you best damn sure do everything you possibly can to protect the guy. Got to keep them upright, got to keep them healthy, because you don't want to have happen what's happening in Indianapolis, where their offensive line wasn't good. Andrew Luck kept getting beat up, and eventually it caught up with him, and it caught up with the team. You don't want to be in that position. So Tunsil, while it's not a rock star or sexy pick, it's a really solid football pick for the Tennessee Titans, in my opinion. Now, you look at the Cleveland Browns picking number 2. Like I said, even if Manziel, he won Sunday, even if he wins another game or so, I think the Browns organization is ready to move on from him. You're probably going to have a new general manager, a new head coach, and they're most certainly not want to tie themselves to Johnny Manziel. Probably trade him to a team like the Cowboys, maybe the Eagles, whoever the case might be. As a result, Cleveland's going to be in a market for a quarterback. And, I'm of the belief that at the moment that a lot of NFL front offices are going to view Paxton Lynch as the best combination quarterback prospect in this year's class. I don't necessarily agree with that assessment, but I understand they might feel that he's the safest of the picks. So there you go. The first probably real shocker, if you saw in my last mock draft, I had the Ravens taking Buckner and the Chargers taking A'Shawn Robinson. So that shouldn't be a huge shock to you. Probably the first shocker would come number 5 at San Francisco, with them taking Ronnie, Stanley, the offensive tackle from Notre Dame, as opposed to taking a quarterback like a Jared Goff, which is where you would see a lot of mock drafts going at this point in time. Now, keep in mind a couple of things. Number 1 is that quarterbacks in recent years have had a tendency to drop a little bit throughout the draft process. Number 2, they tend to be, as a consequence, also incredibly overrated by the draft media. So a lot of times we sit there and assign this logic that because this team doesn't have that guy at quarterback, and because this guy is a quarterback in the draft, whether he merits it or not, we're automatically going to pencil him in and we're going to put him there. And, a lot of teams just don't prescribe to that philosophy. Sure, everyone would love to have a franchise quarterback. If you don't have one, you're doing everything you can to find one. But you can't just go reaching and hoping. And a lot of teams that go reaching and hoping ultimately get bit in the butt. But when it comes to the 49ers as well, I think part of the thing we have to do is we have to factor in a bit of the dipshit factor. Too often when it comes to mock drafts, we're too optimistic and we do too much and we say too many good things and we're focusing on best case scenarios. That's what makes some of the mock drafts we do, especially early on in the process, not very realistic because they don't factor in the dipshit factor. Now, mind you, I see plenty of dipshit factor in the mock drafts that I already see, especially from the known national draft nicks who have had guys like Robert Nkemdiche in their top 3 or top 5 players for months and still have them listed in their top 3 or 5 of mock drafts. How fucking stupid do they look now? I've been beating that drum for a while. Hell, I don't have Nkemdiche going, I think, until the middle of round number 3. I think it was to the Saints. And I didn't even feel good about having them go there. I'm right, they're wrong, they can eat shit, period. But the point is that when it comes to the actual picking of players, I see more dipshit factor in terms of people doing mock drafts as opposed to the dipshit factor of the NFL teams that are actually picking in the NFL draft. Now, while Ronnie Stanley would definitely address a need, which is offensive tackle, he would help improve that offensive line. He'd be an instant upgrade at right tackle, and someday he could slide over and take over for Joe Staley at left tackle potentially. The fact of the matter is, it would be like the 49ers to not take a guy like Jared Goff or Carson Wentz, or take a big-time explosive wide receiver or a guy that could play wide receiver at a decent level at the NFL at all and take an offensive tackle. That's the 49ers. That front office is a mess. They don't know what the hell they're doing. So God only knows this pick could be even worse than Ronnie Stanley, who I think is a bit of a reach, frankly, at number 5. You'll see I have Bosa going number 6 to the Cowboys. And Greg Hardy experiment really hasn't worked. The Cowboys, while you can talk about the lack of Romo, fact is a lack of fourth quarter pass rush. Randy Gregory is nothing. DeMarcus Lawrence has played a nice role, and he's been a good player at times this year for sure. But just because you've devoted second-round picks to pass rushers in the past 2 drafts doesn't mean that you can't spend a first-round pick and a high first-round pick on one here. While it's tempting to just have him sit there and take Jared Goff at this point, I think it's one of those things where they would look at the potential value and talent of Bosa and think it was too good to pass up on. And, whereas I look at Lawrence and I look at Gregory, I see Lawrence as a guy that can start, and I see Gregory more as a situational guy. Bosa is the type of guy that can be a 3-down defensive end, and you even have some versatility in pass rush situations because of his length and his strength to be able to pop him inside. And, that looks like a pretty formidable pass rush. And the Cowboys need that because their defense does not have a lot of talent at all 3 levels or any of the 3 levels. So Bosa, who I think is still a little bit overrated by the draft media, I think at pick 6 for Dallas, he does make quite a bit of sense, and I think, frankly, he's a really, really good fit. In terms of some of the best picks that I see as I did this first round of the mock draft, just working up and down the board, I really like Jaylon Smith to the Miami Dolphins at number 8. Their linebackers are doo-doo. Jaylon Smith could be one of the very best players in this draft. So it's a great combination of filling a huge need, getting really good value. Jaylon Smith right here, you've got versatility too. You can figure out whether you want him to play the middle or whether you want him to play weak side. He's going to be a really good NFL linebacker for a long, long time. So the Dolphins being able to get him at pick 8, it seems to be a really big win to me. In terms of other really, really good picks, I got to look at, let's say, the New York Giants at number 14 being able to get Vernon Hargreaves the third to fall to him. I think Hargreaves is just a teensy-weensy bit overrated by the draft media in terms of where they think he's going to go. This is a 5'10.5", 5'11" corner that doesn't have blazing speed, that has at times gotten beat deep in 2015. You saw that a couple of times in the Alabama game. I think this is going to be a thing where he's had so much of the laser focus on him all year in the scouting community that's going to drop his stock just a little bit, and combined with some of the other things that would happen, as you see in my first 13 picks, it wouldn't be inconceivable for a guy like Hargreaves to be there at 14. Now, with that said, though, the Giants would do really, really well for themselves if they ended up with him at number 14. Number 16, the Philadelphia Eagles. If Chip Kelly's going to stay, they need somebody at quarterback that can actually play, and in particular play in that system. They need White Mariota. They need Carson Wentz. He's that dude. If Carson Wentz had played at a big-time program like an Ohio State or Alabama, everybody would be bending over to lick his sphincter hole, talking about how great he is and how he should clearly be the number 1 prospect in this draft. I think Carson Wentz does have that type of potential and that type of upside. And in terms of the scheme fit in Philadelphia, it is perfect. It's probably the closest to Mariota that Chip Kelly is going to get without going to Tennessee to coach Marcus Mariota. As a result, this is the guy. Assuming that a Chip Kelly would stay, which I don't think is an assumption that should be taken lightly at this point in time at all. But just saying, if he did, Carson Wentz makes a world of sense for them. The Houston Texans at number 19, Ezekiel Elliott. You'll see a lot of mocks having this. It's just the way it broke in this particular case, even though I think the Giants can make an even stronger argument for taking him at 14 because they have 4 running backs and none of them can really fucking play on a consistent basis. But when you look at the Houston Texans, Arian Foster has a huge contract number. He's probably gone. They have nothing else really at the position behind him. It's not really a good place to take a quarterback, especially because in this case, the top 3 quarterbacks in Lynch, Goff, and Wentz are already off the board. Connor Cook is not worth a first-round pick the way I see it, and I think the Houston Texans would ultimately agree because they'll have a hard-on for Hackenberg later on. That's what they're going to do. It's going to be hashtag hard for Hacky. So they'll get their big 3-down, franchise-changing running back here that could be that bell cow for 7, 8, 9 years. So those are some of the picks that I really like. In terms of, again, trends, a lot of defensive line and front 7 depth in this draft. That's really the strength of this draft. And as you look at the mock and you look throughout the 3 rounds, you can see a lot of depth. Now, in terms of some of you that are going to say, well, what about this guy or what about that guy? Well, keep in mind, this is a 3-round mock. Not everybody can be drafted in the first 3 rounds. And just because I don't have them drafted in the first 3 rounds doesn't mean they're not a good player. Doesn't mean that I think that's where they're ultimately going to end up being drafted. Because, again, this is December 15th, 2015. We got, 4.5 months until the NFL draft. I mean, all of my big legwork for the NFL draft is frankly still to come. I'll be putting up scouting reports on individual prospects very, very soon, and I'll be starting with Carson Wentz. He'll be the first one, but there'll be many more to come. Got a lot of work to do, and a lot of things are going to change. It gets a very, very fluid situation. But you're welcome again. Check out my picks, all 3 rounds in the description box down below. Let me know what you think about them. Let me know what you think your team should do, guys that you think are overrated or underrated in this draft process, maybe guys that we should be keeping our eyes on, maybe guys that you want to get me kind of turned on to and be like, hey, you need to check this guy out a little bit more. It's kind of like what I was doing for you heading up into the 2014 NFL draft when I was talking about, you remember Khalil Mack? And then you remember I was talking about this guy from Pittsburgh named Aaron Donald. And then there was this wide receiver from LSU. Do you remember him? His name was Odell Beckham Jr. Just saying. All right, later.